Now we join Jon Snow and Kirsty Lang for Channel 4 News.
A new tomorrow for rural Britain. The environmentalists love it. But what about Blue sky thinking for the countryside calls for the biggest shake-up in food production in 50 years. But who will end up paying for it? Good evening. The call for a fundamental overhaul in countryside policy comes from the Farming and Food Commission set up against the backdrop of the burning pyres of the foot and mouth crisis. It concentrates on the wider needs of rural Britain and offers farmers hope in the next decade, but no more jam today. Tonight we analyse the recommendations, talk to the Minister, the disappointed farmers' leader and the report's author. Also tonight, more arrests on the anti-terrorist trail, this time in northeast England. But is it a hunt for very small fry? And is MI5 anyway equipped to cope? Plus how far he's come, or has he? As George Bush prepares to go to Capitol Hill for his State of the Union address, how will his vision be received? And life may have taken its toll on the greatest beach boy of them all, but he's still performing. Brian Wilson tells us how he does it.
The California Girls, you know. That's how I wrote that. First with the bass line, then the chorus, then the melody.
And the other headlines tonight, a young boy whose dismembered body was pulled from the Thames was almost certainly the victim of a ritual killing, a witchcraft expert tells police. Britain's most senior judge warns mobile phone thieves to expect up to 5 years in jail. And it's money versus morals as Las Vegas decides whether Mike Tyson deserves a licence to box.
Unsustainable and dysfunctional. A government-appointed commission has slammed England's farming system, and it says simply tinkering around the edges will not help. The first of 3 investigations into the industry following foot and mouth calls for radical reform throughout the food chain. The chairman of the Farming and Food Commission, Sir Don Curry, wants to see the most sweeping changes since the Second World War. The main recommendations: an end to common agricultural policy subsidies for food production, and while that's being negotiated in Europe, subsidies should be switched to farmers caring for the countryside. The Office of Fair Trading should investigate how supermarkets deal with farmers, and aid should be extended to organic farmers so that they can compete with their European counterparts. The division will not happen unless there's new money, as our science correspondent Andrew Veach reports.
Paint up in a minute as well.
Chris Gaydon could do with a vision. The pedigree dairy herd on his Devon farm was slaughtered in March as part of the much criticised contiguous cull to stop the foot and mouth virus spreading. This after BSE. £500,000 in compensation means he'll be able to start over, but maybe he'll buy fewer cattle and farm less intensively, because he accepts production subsidies will end.
Every farmer knows that a system of paying farmers, subsidising farmers on production, head of beef, lamb, litres of milk, whatever, is destined to fail. Once all those products are in surplus, it seems silly.
If today's report from the Farming and Food Commission is implemented, all production subsidies will go, much to the annoyance of national farmers' leaders, driving the most fundamental change in agriculture since the Second World War.
The Commission agreed straight away that things cannot go on as they are. The situation today in the English farming and food industry is unsustainable in every sense of that term. Current farming policy is not serving anyone well. No one is happy with the way it is applied. The time is right to review it.
I get a sense that the government is keen to act. I'm sure that we'll all be frustrated as to how rapidly they will be able to do what we'd like them to do, but I hope that pressure will be applied to keep the impetus up. We've started a process, we've worked very hard over the last 5 or 6 months to get this happen in the timescale they wanted. I think it is now government's duty to act fast in order to try and help the industry.
The Commission cost its recommendations, about 100 of them, at £500 million over 3 years. But the key is the Common Agricultural Policy. Under the CAP, countries can now start switching funds from subsidising production to improving the countryside. It's called in the jargon modulation. British farmers get £2 billion in direct payments under the CAP. The government is already committed to switching 4.5% by 2004. That's £90 million. The Commission says this should more than double to 10%. That's £200 million. and it should rise again to 20%, the maximum permitted, by 2006. That's £400 million. Under the rules, this money must be matched pound for pound by the government, so a significant £800 million would go to improving the environment, if the Chancellor agrees.
We want to see farmers rewarded for their stewardship of the environment. They deserve it. The public wants a good countryside, its farmers are going to have to provide that countryside, and we want to see farmers paid for that. But we've now got to get the additional money out of the Treasury, and we've got to get government as a whole, obviously DEFRA, but other bits of government as well, to implement it.
The report calls for a sea change in agriculture policy. Out goes the god of production, in comes Mother Earth. And you can't get much closer to that new ideal than here in South Week in Devon and Matt and Suzanne Knight's ultra-eco-friendly organic farm. Matt Knight's 56 head of traditional South Devon cattle escaped foot and mouth disease. He breeds them and sells some for beef. And he signed up to some of the jumble of existing environmental schemes to improve the farm.
Pretty much every hedge on this farm needs attention. We're doing about 1,000 metres a year, as I say. There are old pastures and meadows that date back to medieval times on this farm. You know, we're farming because we want to produce food, but we want to produce food in a sustainable way. So protecting the environment has always been part of what we want to do anyway. But it would certainly be nice if we were paid a bit more for it.
Today's report also says that adding value will be essential for farmers. The Knights have just such a plan, and it's taking shape in their yard. It's the Yum Yum Organic Mobile Burger Bar. The economics are simple. A calf sold for slaughter fetches a maximum £800. Turned into burgers, it's worth £4,000. And the Yum Yum Bar is already booked for the Glastonbury Festival in June.
But it seems to have a flat tire. That is Andrew Veach reporting. Well, I've been speaking to the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Secretary, Margaret Beckett. Secretary of State, it's 2012. Paint me a picture of the sort of rural countryside you probably know best, which is near your constituency, say Derbyshire. What would be different about it?
I think there may be a great deal in the appearance of the countryside that might be similar, because certainly what the Food and Farming Commission, who've reported to us today, want to see is they want to see the landscape sustained. They want to see good land management. Depending on, perhaps not so much near where we are, but in some parts of the country, you might see perhaps a lower level of livestock, because there is some concern that the structures of production support that we have now might have encouraged some overstocking, and there's concern about whether that's led to environmental degradation.
More hedges?
Hopefully more hedges. You might also perhaps see more areas of wetland, depending on just where you are. One of the issues, again, that they identify is that it is possible to use land, allow land to flood in agricultural areas which might save flooding elsewhere.
Right. Well, I mean, there's no doubt that this report has been well received generally. I mean, if one looks at today's reactions, everything's positive, except, of course, the NFU, the farmers, as a collective organisation. And they're very angry indeed. NFU's strong opposition to new modulation proposals. Well, that's pretty black and white, isn't it? How do you win them?
It isn't altogether black and white, because yes, the NFU are very worried and their members are very anxious about the proposals for modulation. But
and
of course there are other things.
And that's because you don't really address immediate short-term crises.
No, there are other things in the report that in fact they do welcome and that go with the grain of a lot of work that the NFU with their members has been doing over the years. But there isn't any doubt they are very concerned about that particular proposal. And I think it's for a mixture of reasons. On the one hand, they are anxious that at a time when things have been very difficult in farming for a long time, long before foot and mouth, they're anxious that to bring in further change is a further worrying signal to farmers. They want to be reassured that this is change that can be managed without farmers being seriously disadvantaged.
Last point, and perhaps the most important, money. Actually, it's a surprisingly small sum that might get British farming and the whole chain sorted. I mean, 400 million from the Treasury on an annual basis seems to be one figure that I've got out of here. How's life with the Treasury? Do you expect to be able to fund this?
Well, obviously we've only had the report today. It's an issue that my Treasury colleagues will want to look at, and equally there's never a marvellous time with the Treasury, and since September the 11th I think there is more pressure than normal on government finances. But what I think the Commission are saying to government, the Independent Commission, it's their view, they are saying to us that they believe that to bring about what will be in the long term beneficial change for food and farming, that there needs to be something in the nature of pump priming to help to encourage that transformation that they want to see. I certainly take that analysis and that recommendation very seriously, and I know my colleagues will.
Secretary of State, thank you. Later in the programme, Sir Don Curry, the author of the report, will be here to defend his recommendations with the National Farmers leader Ben Gill and a leading academic who wants all farming subsidies to be scrapped right now. Now, 6 men have been arrested in an anti-terrorist operation in the northeast of England involving 150 police officers from 2 forces. Detectives in charge said that the men were not directly linked to the September the 11th attacks, and they're now being held in a number of undisclosed locations. Our reporter Oliver King is in Stockton, where it's believed some of the suspects are now being detained.
It was called Ice Bolt, an operation involving 150 officers, some armed, from the Cleveland and Durham police, acting on information from Scotland Yard's anti-terrorist unit. 6 men from the Teesside area were arrested in dawn raids, and we believe 3 of them are being detained in Stockton police station behind me. 3 of those arrests came in Darlington, where forensic teams were this afternoon carrying on with an in-depth search for evidence. Neighbours say little was known of the Algerian man who recently rented this flat in Gladstone Street, although some expressed suspicion when Quranic verses appeared in his window following September the 11th. In the next street, another man, said by neighbours to be a businessman of Middle Eastern origin, was taken away for questioning. There were 2 simultaneous raids at addresses in Redcar and Middlesbrough, and above a kebab shop in Seaton Carew near Hartlepool, a man thought to be of Iraqi origin was woken by police shortly after 7 a.m. The police have indicated that they're not holding these men under suspicion of being frontline terrorists, but more for being the backroom staff, which means they've raised funds and given logistical support. And while they are thought to be involved in what they're calling international Islamic terrorism, they're neither thought to be members of Al-Qaeda or involved in September the 11th. No one's yet been charged, and the police have another 6 days to carry on their questioning. Back to you in the studio, John.
Oliver King in Stockton. Well, with me, Dr. John Gearson of King's College London. He teaches members of the armed forces about Islamic terrorism. Dr. Gearson, not members of Al-Qaeda, and a bit indistinct as to who they actually might be. Who do you think they might be?
Well, I think the anti-terrorist branch is probably focusing on 2 possibilities. First of all, international terrorist organisations, in other words, foreign nationals based in Britain, possibly setting up cells. And secondly, especially in light of the British people being held in Guantanamo, the possibility of British passport holders and British nationals supporting various international Islamic radical groups.
Well, now, it's a long time after September the 11th, and there is a sudden rash of arrests going on across the country. Is that because somebody in Cuba is singing, or because things have changed?
Well, crucially, we've had 2 major pieces of legislation in under a year come into force. The Terrorism Act 2000 and the anti-terror legislation passed in November following September the 11th. And to some extent, we are seeing the outcome of that increased level of power given to the state to actually crack down on terrorism. The other suggestion I would put is that the concern about focusing on particular communities is clearly reduced since September the 11th, and I know the police are going to a great deal of trouble to explain to community leaders what they're doing in advance, but it's not going to stop them doing it because they may upset a few people.
Well, now, what about the sensitivity of the security forces in dealing with an ethnic minority? Are they any better equipped? I mean, they for a long time were having to target Northern Ireland, for example, and just as they got accomplished in Irish accents and the rest of it, presumably this is a rather different challenge.
Well, that's right. Perhaps you should think about security operations as a supertanker in terms of turning them to a new threat. And clearly, British nationals primarily were threatened by Irish-related terrorism for 30 years. They were not threatened by international Islamic terrorism. It affected our allies, but not Britain itself. Since September the 11th, we've clearly taken a strategic decision to address all forms of international terrorism.
But for example, I mean, Does MI5 recruit enough people from the ethnic minorities to be of use?
Well, MI5 don't release their recruitment statistics in any shape or form. Clearly, the FBI have publicly been recruiting language experts for appropriate areas on the web and in newspapers. In Britain, we're a bit more careful, but it's more likely that traditional intelligence techniques such as encouraging members of these organisations to actually start working for the security services will be more effective in the short term.
Well, I mean, do you sense that they have compromised some of these cells, as you put it?
Well, clearly the people who've been caught in Afghanistan from various countries have given America and Britain huge amounts of intelligence, and Al-Qaeda and their supporters just don't know how much they know.
Dr. Gerson, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now here's Kirsty with details of some more of today's news.
Thousands of rail travellers are still experiencing disruption on the second day of a strike at South West Trains. The company is running a third of its normal services by using managers in place of guards and other striking staff. But the rail union involved in the dispute has expressed its worries about the safety implications of the company's strategy.
I, at the moment, and so is the union, very concerned about what is being suggested as training for guards. And it's not only guards, of course, they're doing it for station staff as well. A 20-minute briefing for station staff is ridiculous. On top of that, the guards' 2-day training for managers who have supposed to have been in the grade before, well, we know some of those individuals certainly haven't been in the grade before.
And there are more strikes to come. Workers at Manchester Airport are to stage a series of 1-hour stoppages in a dispute over security. The industrial action at the country's third largest airport is due to begin next Monday. The unions are protesting at reductions in security staff at the airport. Yesterday's gales, which caused the deaths of 8 people in Scotland and the north of England, have abated. But thousands of people are still without electricity in Scotland. Dozens of lorries have had to be rescued after they've been blown down embankments. The driver of this one near Newcastle survived, but 3 other HGV drivers died. The residents of this house in Edinburgh watched as a 90-foot beach came down just outside.
If she had gone a few feet either side, she would have taken either that house or our house completely. I mean, so it really is a miracle the way it's fallen.
The Archbishop of York has expressed his sympathy for the 3 children of a woman from Loughborough who was killed by masonry falling from a medieval church. The Lord Chief Justice, Lord Wolfe, has warned mobile phone thieves to expect tougher sentences. Lord Wolfe said today that against a background of soaring phone thefts, in most circumstances mobile muggers would be sent to prison. He insisted that the tough sentencing policy would apply whatever the age or previous record of the offender. Lord Wolfe said terms of up to 3 years would be imposed for offences involving no weapons and up to 5 years or more when weapons and violence were involved. The immigration authorities in Australia have hinted that they might close a detention centre at Woomera, where asylum seekers have made suicide attempts. They've also moved out 9 Iraqi and Afghan young people who've been threatening suicide at Woomera.
Australian church leaders and the Red Cross have condemned conditions at the Woomera Desert Detention Camp, but there are signs that Canberra is listening. Tonight, one group of teenage detainees was moved to Adelaide, 300 miles away, after threatening to commit suicide. That still leaves another group of 18-year-olds who are maintaining their threat and remain in the camp. A 16-year-old Iraqi youth did attempt suicide overnight, according to his lawyer.
A 16-year-old unaccompanied child from Iraq attempted to hang himself last night on the fence in his compound. He was taken away by guards and put into the medical centre.
The hunger strike by over 200 South Asian, Middle Eastern and Afghan people at Woomera is now in its 14th day. Some inmates have sewn their lips together. They want their asylum claims speeded up. Presently, Australia takes up to 3 years to process claims and detains people in camps whilst it does so. Prime Minister John Howard sees no reason to apologise for that.
Not reluctant to answer any questions. We have a completely principled and soundly based policy, and I don't make any apology.
But protests have already spread to some of the other 4 camps across Australia. In Port Hedland, Western Australia, one inmate had this to say.
What have we done to Australia to deserve such treatment?
Tonight, though, further signs that the government may be bending to pressure. Officials are hinting that they may close down the Woomera detention camp altogether.
That report by Alex Thompson. Airlines are being warned about an illegal trade involving the sale of second-hand aircraft parts. Italian police raised the alarm after raiding a hangar at Rome's Fiumicino airport. 6 men were arrested on suspicion of trafficking in parts from ageing Airbuses and then using false documents to claim that they were airworthy.
When we come back, the State of the Union according to President Bush. He led the war, but can he lead the peace? And Las Vegas gambles with Mike Tyson's boxing future as it decides whether he deserves a license to fight there again. From mangled syntax to war hero, President Bush has become a leader transformed. When he came to office, the man known as W was widely treated as a national joke who wouldn't prove up to the job. But despite the odd mishap with pretzels, the conflict in Afghanistan has boosted George Bush's ratings sky high. Later tonight, he'll be in Congress to give his first State of the Union address, outlining what he calls his 3 great goals for the year ahead. Our correspondent Sarah Smith reports now from Washington on how the president's vision will be received.
At 9:05 a.m. on September the 11th, when Bush was told that America was clearly under attack, it was far less clear that this crisis would turn him into one of the most popular American presidents ever.
The President of the United States.
An administration whose foreign policy was defined by unilateralism suddenly pitched into the fraught diplomatic task of building a worldwide coalition of support.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
Frankly, he does see things rather in black and white, rather than a million shades of gray that are confusing. You want somebody who is set on victory, who knows the difference between good and evil and doesn't spend endless hours debating whether that's good and whether that's evil and what should I do and what can I do. You want somebody who says, I see what the problem is. We have an enemy. We're going to defeat our enemy.
But this is the man who previously couldn't even name the leader of Pakistan.
And you can name him. General. I can't name the general. And it's General.
Whereas tonight he will welcome Afghanistan's new leader as his guest of honour at the State of the Union address, promising help to rebuild that country. This from the president, who stated he had no interest in nation building.
To welcome a good friend.
World leaders were not queuing up to stand shoulder to shoulder with George Bush at the start of his term. Now they're elbowing each other aside.
A man who loves his wife as much as I love mine.
Even America's controversial withdrawal from the ABM treaty passed with barely a murmur of complaint from his new friend Vladimir Putin. But as Tony Blair knows all too well, making friends abroad doesn't always help your standing at home.
You can be more loved abroad than at home. This won't happen to Mr. Bush Jr. in the same way, because people don't make a distinction between foreign and domestic policy. Not when American civilian airliners are used as weapons of death in the middle of American cities. To the contrary, people think that's domestic, and we take it personally. So the dichotomy doesn't and won't inflict itself on Mr. Bush.
Early successes in the war on terrorism have undoubtedly contributed to George W.'s record poll ratings. But public support might be difficult to maintain because, as he'll emphasise tonight, the next phase will be more complicated. Iraq may be on the back burner for now, but the battle is far from over, and he needs to keep everyone on board for phase 2.
People respect power in the Muslim world. They're seeing him there as the man who has emerged victorious. And therefore, if he can now add the dimension of sagacity or wisdom or compassion, I think he will build up support. In the second phase, as it were, of the war against terrorism, he has to be more nuanced, a little bit more cautious, and a bit more of an elder statesman than the man of action that he's been so far.
The recession does pose significant challenges for George Bush, and tonight he will talk of the need for job creation. But the economic downturn doesn't yet seem to be threatening his record popularity. There are 3 big issues in American politics at the moment: the war, the economy and Enron. The President will address the first two at length, but he will not speak the name of Enron. He will mention the need for greater corporate responsibility and disclosure, but there will be no direct reference to the only issue which currently threatens to blight his remarkably successful presidency. Sarah Smith, Channel 4 News, Washington.
Overheated nonsense. The government here is trying to knock down the row over its links to the collapsed energy giant Enron. The Prime Minister's spokesman rubbished claims the firm might have bought access to ministers or influence energy policy. But Labour's also facing pressure over its links with Anderson, the accountancy firm. Anderson was the auditor for the DeLorean sports car company. When it failed, taking millions of pounds of taxpayers' money with it, the Conservatives effectively barred Anderson from government work. But in the 90s, the firm gave assistance to New Labour, for example, by helping the then Shadow Chancellor Gordon Brown to draw up his windfall tax on the utilities. Shortly after Labour's election in 1997, the ban on Anderson doing government work was lifted. Our political editor, Eleanor Goodman, is at Westminster. So, Eleanor, where's all this going?
Well, what the argument has essentially boiled down to today is whether Labour, on being elected, used its position to give its friends Arthur Anderson basically a payback for all the help they'd given them in opposition by allowing it to bid for some very lucrative contracts. What had happened was that by this time, by 1997, the government and Arthur Anderson had been locked in a very expensive legal battle for 12 years, and the then Conservative Attorney General asked officials to review the case to see essentially whether the fight was worth the candle. And the officials concluded, apparently, that the ban should be lifted for fear of Arthur Anderson launching a counterclaim, and that recommendation was then accepted by the incoming Labour government. At the same time, another lot of civil servant lawyers said they thought that the legal case should go to some form of mediation, and the judge who was appointed recommended settling for a much lower figure than the 100 million that the government had been after. And again, the Labour government accepted this recommendation. Now, according to Helen Liddell, who was Energy Secretary at the time and who was touring the TV stations today, that meant that the decision wasn't a political one at all.
Legal advice was presented to the government after we were elected in 1997 to suggest that we could be the subject of legal challenge were we to persist with a policy that had previously been adopted. Now, like any government, we must act on that advice. Subsequent to that, there are negotiations lawyer to lawyer, but at the end of the day, Arthur Anderson, if they bid for government business, must do so in the normal way, in the full tendering process. If they win that business, it is because they have been successful in a tendering process that is at arm's length from government ministers.
In other words, not yes minister, but yes my learned friend, the top civil service lawyer. But the opposition parties say that there's still something very suspicious about this close working relationship between Arthur Anderson and the government, particularly the amount of business that had been conducted between the two since the election. And they claim that the government is still being economical with the facts. And today their response to all this was that they wanted more proof.
Conservative governments for 12 years decided to fight this through the courts to try to get £200 million back for the taxpayer. Senior ministers in those governments have made it clear there's no question of them ever having to settle for £21 million, which is what Labour did within 6 months of coming to office. This wasn't a good deal, and the Labour Party need to explain why they reached it.
Good to hear the kettle singing. How black is the pot?
Should I pursue that metaphor or should I cast it aside? I think the Tories are basically looking for some way of luring out some former minister in the last Tory administration who'll come out and say, we had that recommendation, we cast it aside because it wasn't good value. But clearly this has got under the government's skin. They don't like the tactics they used in opposition being used against them. But I have a suspicion that without a killer fact or with some former minister coming out and actually disproving what Downing Street has said today, this argument may be coming to an end, and I think we'll see the argument tomorrow at question time switching back on to the public sector and more bread and butter issues, because really basically all the parties know that that has much more resonance with the electorate than this kind of argument.
Eleanor Goodman at Westminster. You're watching Channel 4 News. Our main headlines at 7:30. Britain's leading judge has warned mobile phone thieves to expect tougher sentences with jail terms up to 5 years. 6 people have been arrested in northeast England in connection with alleged terrorism after dawn raids by more than 150 police officers. And the farming and food industries are serving no one and have to change, says a report into England's rural future. The minister in charge, Margaret Beckett, has welcomed its call, told Channel 4 News radical reforms would need plenty of government money.
What I think the Commission are saying to government, the Independent Commission, it's their view, they are saying to us that they believe that to bring about what will be in the long term beneficial change for food and farming, that there needs to be something in the nature of pump priming.
So the state of England's farming industry is roundly condemned by the first of the 3 government investigations in the wake of the foot and mouth catastrophe. The Policy Commission on the Future of Farming and Food wants sweeping changes, including an end to common agricultural policy subsidies for food production. Instead, subsidies diverted to farmers caring for the countryside. The Office of Fair Trading is to investigate how supermarkets deal with farmers, and more aid for organic farmers so that they can compete with their European counterparts. With me now, the chairman of the Commission on Farming and Food, Sir Don Curry, the president of the National Farmers Union, Ben Gill, and the writer and lecturer on rural policy, Marion Shroud. Ben Gill, blue sky thinking, but you see immediate clouds.
Well, the problem comes with the so-called modulation. This is where the proposal to rapidly rack up the amount deducted from farmers' payments, take it out of this right-hand pocket, recycle it through complex bureaucratic machinery at a cost, and even though it's matched pound for pound, I perhaps only get 70 pence back. This is not the proper way to fund environmental measures. They should come from the proper fund, which is not adequately funded from Europe because of historic government inaction on it.
But sooner or later, and you think it should be sooner, Marion Shroud, these subsidies to farmers have got to end, and you believe they should end right away. And what do you do about the instant pain?
Well, I think what Ben Gill has just said illustrates the problem. I mean, what he and his members want is a switch from food production subsidies to subsidies for something else, conservation and to some extent public access. Now, I think that that's wrong, because I think that the conservation of the countryside and the provision of access are free public goods, and it's selling humanity's birthright to start forking out millions of pounds every year to farmers for those things. OK, we don't want lots more food produced.
Sharp
intake of breath.
Well, I mean, to say the free public goods, who creates the countryside, who looks after it? I go back to an incident
Well, I go to Sir Don Curry and say, well, you think they don't look after it well enough?
We think that farmers have the responsibility, as indeed better said, of managing the countryside and looking after it. And farmers have done their very best. No one is blaming farmers in this report for the current situation. But we're saying that we now need to take new measures to ensure that proper environmental standards are in place and that farmers are rewarded for delivering those environmental standards, sensible environmental outcomes.
And you absolutely part company with that?
Well, you see, it's not a new idea. I mean, this has been going on for years, this idea of OK, switching subsidies and spending it on conservation and these flat rate payments to farmers, so long as bribing them so that they don't destroy the countryside. There are some targeted payments for improving the environment, and I have no quarrel with that. But the idea of these flat rate payments just bribing farmers endlessly, huge amounts of public money, providing no long-term guarantee of the attraction to the countryside, is wrong, and I think we've got to start squaring up to all this.
To use emotive words like bribing, the reality is managing the countryside does not come free. Managing hedges, ditches, ponds, planting trees, replanting hedges, just keeping the vista there is a cost. Keeping the balance between all the plants and other aspects of life is a costly business, and somewhere that has got to be paid for. While farming's been profitable, it's come out of farming profits. As we've moved through the last decade, we've moved to environmental schemes. We've pioneered them in Britain. We've turned around the decline in farmland hedgerows. We're actually seeing positive effects on bird life. But the point is...
But the way you speak makes it sound as if Sir Don's redundant, that he's already... that all the work's been done.
I was going on to say there is always more to do, but the key element is that farming has to restore its profitability. It has to have a CAP that's changed in line with everybody else, not unilaterally, that can do that.
Well, how does your vision work if the farmers aren't, in fact, effectively to go out of business tomorrow?
We recognise very clearly in the report that the current system is not working. Farmers are not making money. It is a long time since many farmers made any profit whatsoever. That's not sustainable. The current system is not delivering, so it has to change. and it will not help just to fine-tune it, to tinker at the edges. We believe a new vision is needed, a new system of support is needed, and we recommend radical action.
He supports that, but as I understand it, the problem is how do we get from here to there? And you're worried that we're getting from here to there by simply cutting off subsidy, which you quite like, cutting off subsidy, and that immediately, in the immediate short term, before there's any long-term gain, bankrupts the farmer.
Can I be clear? We are not suggesting that support is removed. We're suggesting that distorting food subsidies are removed, but not support. We want to see a switch from the current system to a system which delivers better environmental outcomes, better management of the countryside. And we want to do it through a friendly, easily accessible system, not through the bureaucracy that Ben has mentioned. We entirely agree. The existing environmental schemes are very bureaucratic. We want that changed in parallel with the additional funds made available.
Okay, I want to get to the consumer then, because obviously what the consumer wants is an end to the sort of cartel price fixing that goes on between the supermarkets, and often to the detriment of the farmer. How's that going to happen?
Well, the next thing you were saying that food is historically dear, John. It isn't, and food has been cheaper in the last decade by the average of 1% per annum compared to the average retail price. And farm gate prices have dropped by about 5% per annum over that period.
But I can hear Devon farmers complaining about the way in which their prices are rigged against them in terms of dealing with the supermarket.
Exactly. And what we've got to do is, as mentioned in the report, which echoes our strategy from last year, is put in a balancing collaborative strength. If the 4 big retailers have 60% of the market share, then we need 4 cooperatives, farmers coming to work together to cut out the inefficiencies in the supply chain, and there are many inefficiencies, the cost of which comes down to us as the end of the chain, the weak end of the chain, and put it back into profit back to the farm gate. The problem we have, identified in the report, picked up from our submission, the Competition Commission then puts its hand all over it and ignores the fact we're in a single market, European market, and starts talking about monopolies.
How do you
totally
resolve
unrealistic.
Well, I think that, so far we've just been talking about how we support farmers. I mean, why do we have to support farmers?
I've just been talking about the marketplace, not support. I've been talking about getting more from the marketplace.
This whole discussion has been about supporting farmers, and Ben Gill has been saying, oh, well, farmers are doing better, they're doing very good for wildlife in the countryside. The countryside is a disaster because of intensive farming. And this is business as usual, and I think it's going to be very disastrous.
We believe that the farmers should concentrate on the marketplace. It is much more sustainable going forward if farmers have a secure position in the market, are delivering food for which they're properly paid for, and that it's not distracted or distorted by subsidies. Now, Ben is right. We need to seriously drive forward collaboration, cooperation, integration in the food chain so that farmers play their full role in delivering what's required as efficiently as possible and being properly reflected in the price.
Well, surely the biggest problem is that if we remove subsidies, actually, of course, what will happen is that food will be cheaper elsewhere. You can get it from Kenya or from elsewhere in Europe.
Well, the problem more is that America at this stage is pumping billions of dollars into predominantly its arable sector. The American farmer bill, which 6 years ago was going to say they were going to, that was it, no more, they were going to withdraw, they're now more supported than Europe. And the point is, in any terms of reform, you have to do it first in the European context and then in the world context, the Doha.
Well, let's, in a word, ask the two of you, because you're the key, is this a basis, at least, for a new future?
The basis is the marketplace.
But is this?
That is mentioned in it, but not modulation and not the other part.
Marion Shaw.
No, it's not the basis for the future. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we've not got an increasing demand for food, and so you've got to square up to that. I mean, farmland in Britain becomes more productive. We're not consuming lots more food, so we have to think of some other things. And the main way that is being proposed is we subsidise farmers, but using some other source of funds. I think that's crazy, and it's not solving the long-term problem.
Marion Shaw, Ben Gill, Sir Don Curry, thank you all three very much. I'm sorry, there is a serious technical problem with that, and we will try to return to it when we can. The fact is that the Beach Boys, if anyone's old enough to remember them, and I'm afraid I am, were one of the greatest pop groups of all time, and the real brains behind it was him. But he's the first to admit that he was destroyed by his own success, destroyed by, well, perhaps an abundance of too much money, too many drugs, too much alcohol, too much life. And we'll bring you that in just a moment if we can. We're unable to do that, I'm sorry. unsustainable and dysfunctional. You could say that, unfortunately, of the technical problem we have tonight, but that actually was the verdict of a government-appointed commission which has slammed England's farming system. And it says simply tinkering around with the edges of the farming crisis will not help. The first of 3 investigations into the industry following foot and mouth calls for radical reform throughout the food chain. The chairman of the Farming and Food Commission, Sir Don Curry, wants to see the most sweeping changes since the Second World War. The main recommendations are an end to common agricultural policy subsidies for food production, and whilst that is being negotiated in Europe, subsidies should be switched to farmers caring for the countryside. The Office of Fair Trading should investigate how supermarkets deal with farmers, and aid should be extended to organic farmers so that they can compete with their European counterparts. But the vision will not happen unless there is new money. Well, now, the most important aspect, therefore, in a way, is what kind of negotiation Mrs. Beckett, who is charged with trying to reform the farming industry, is able to strike with the Treasury. Because at the bottom line of today's report is the sum of some £400 to balance the changes that have to be made in the Common Agricultural Policy. I'm joined now by our science correspondent, Andrew Veach. Andrew, you heard the opposition expressed by the Farmers' leader, Ben Gill. But on the other hand, today we have seen fantastic support from virtually every aspect of the rural community.
There is a split here. We were down filming in Devon, and the Farmers' Union, forgive me, sorry, I've just been reading. The Farmers' Union there is very supportive. They like the idea. The farmers we talked to down there were perfectly happy with the idea. They don't mind losing a little bit if it means that they've got sustainable farming for the future. And they need sustainable farming.
But there is a bottom line here, and I was kind of hinting at it in the introduction. The problem is this immensely complicated business of the Common Agricultural Policy. All of us absolutely loathe it. People talk about reforming it. Is this held hostage? Is today's report held hostage to ever changing the CAP?
No, they can do it right now. They don't have to have Europe's agreement. They already have Europe's agreement to increase the amount they put into the environment by 20%, a total of 20%. That's £400 million a year. They can do that tomorrow. They could have done that, they could have decided that a couple of years ago.
So how much does Mrs. Beckett have to go to Gordon Brown for in the coming budget to get this rolling?
Immediately, £500 million over 3 years, to implement all the Commission's recommendations.
Not very much when you think about the railways.
Nothing, no, compared with that. And then ongoing from 2006, which is a few years away, £400 million a year to match the money that comes from Europe. So it is not a lot of money. Remember, the farmers get £3 billion worth of subsidies a year, all in. It's a whole lot.
OK, so how do you get over the complaint from Ben Gill that the immediate changes are going to cause terrible pain to farmers right now?
I would simply point him to his farmers, who actually, well, certainly the farmers down in Devon, who are not saying that. They think it's a price worth paying if they get sustainable farming. They think they're not going to lose much out of it because they're going to be able to get it back through environment schemes. They're going to be fine.
Andrew Veach, thank you. And I'm really very sorry about the technical problems tonight, which were completely disastrous. They meant that we couldn't bring you that interview with Brian Wilson. We hope to be able to broadcast it at a later date. In the meantime, you can actually see the full uncut version of the interview on our website, usual address. We shall be back tomorrow night, 7 o'clock as ever is. Until then, from Kirsty and from me, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.